Robert Martinez, state historian of New Mexico, and this is New Mexico history in 10 minutes. The Villasur Hyde paintings are an amazing work of art that tell us a great deal about life in New Mexico in the 1700s. Part work of art, part artifact, and part documentary record, they tell us about a very important and significant expedition that took place from New Mexico, Santa Fe specifically, to what is now Nebraska in 1720. And here's what happened. The expedition is called the Villasur expedition, named after Pedro de Villasur. He was a Spaniard living in what's today northern Mexico, Nueva Vizcaya, who had quite a military career. He's there operating in the late 1600s and early 1700s, but by 1715, more or less, he's in New Mexico, and he is the lieutenant governor of this province. In 1720, the governor at that time, Antonio Valverde y Cosio, got word, a rumor, that there were French people bordering on the New Mexico territories just to the east, and he perceived this as a threat to Spanish borders and Spanish sovereignty. So here's what Valverde did. He appointed Villasur to lead a military expedition to explore and to investigate. Villasur brought with him Nuevo Mexicanos, Hispano people, and he also brought native Pueblo warriors and guides to participate in this expedition. So what happened? Well, we'll get to that. But let's talk about the Hyde paintings. These paintings are really fascinating. They're obviously works of art that depict historical events. They can be seen at the New Mexico History Museum in Santa Fe and also at the Albuquerque City Museum. And what they show are art styles with flat two-dimensional images that foreshadow our Santero tradition we'll see develop in the 1800s. I'm not sure if there's a connection, but clearly there's some sort of influence that will come to us later on. We're not sure who painted them, although there's the idea that a member of the Giron family may have painted the Villasur Hyde paintings in the late 1720s. But there's also the notion that they may have been painted much later, even in the 1770s, because of the fashions we see and the hairstyles. Also, some of the pigments can't be found in New Mexico. You have to go south to what's now Sonora to find them. So we're not sure exactly when or where or who painted them. But they show the expedition to what's now Nebraska, and they revealed that it was a catastrophe for the New Mexicans. We see Native American warriors. We see New Mexicans dressed in black flat hats with their arquebuses, their muskets, but also bows and arrows and heavy jackets. They are trying to battle French soldiers and Pawnee Indians who are attacking them with their own arquebuses, muskets, and bows and arrows. And the first to fall, or at least one of the first to fall, was Villasur himself. We see in the painting that he's laid out, and a Frenchman that came from New Mexico, ironically, Jean l'Archevêque, Juan Archiveque, he is tending to Villasur in the painting, but he also falls. He's a common ancestor to a lot of us New Mexicans. And you also see Native Americans, women and children hiding in bushes and behind trees. And it just depicts this massacre that takes place in 1720 in what's today Nebraska. This tells us something about New Mexico and the region in the 1700s. 100 years earlier, in the 1600s, the New Mexican Spanish enterprise was essentially evangelizing and trying to convert the Pueblo people to Catholicism and incorporate this area into the greater Spanish Empire. It succeeded, but only to a point, and we know that with the Pueblo revolt, that ended, that was over. But the Spanish returned in the 1690s, and that concept of incorporating the pueblos into the Spanish system continued into the 1700s. But the focus shifted towards the east and protecting New Mexico specifically, and Nueva España, what's now Mexico to the south, in a more general way, from British and French expansion that was taking place. So we need to keep that in mind, that these paintings and that history shows that New Mexico in the 1700s was in a unique position. On the one hand, it was in a constant state of war with Comanche and Apache Navajo and other plains and nomadic peoples. On the other hand, New Mexico also had to fend off European enemies of Spain. Well, I've talked about Genízaros, how within the New Mexico system, they were a buffer between, on the one hand, the Spanish New Mexicans and the Puebloan New Mexicans, and on the other, those warring peoples. But generally, if you think about it, philosophically, the whole province of Nuevo Mexico, New Mexico, was a Genízaro nation, if I could borrow a term, because the whole area was a buffer between expanding British and French interests on the one hand, and then your wealthier and more established Spanish territories to the south. So keep that in mind. New Mexico in the 1700s as a crossroads of native peoples, Spanish peoples, mixed blood peoples, and French and British interests. Now, a word about the French. On the one hand, you had to the east people from Louisiana, people coming down from Canada, French colonists and people of French ancestry. And they start to make their way into New Mexico in the mid and late 1700s as trappers and hunters and merchants. So this starts an interesting phase for New Mexico's population. But there were two Frenchmen who settled New Mexico in the 1690s with the names of Jean l'Archevêque and Jacques Grolet. Archevêque was from Bayonne, France, and Grolet was from La Rochelle, France, and they were part of the La Salle expedition that had come from France in 1684 to colonize the Mississippi, what's now Texas area. Well, that went afoul when some of the crew members mutinied and killed La Salle. We think that Grolet and Archevêque were part of that mutiny because they ended up traveling into what's now Texas, kind of repeating the odyssey and journey that Cabeza de Vaca and Esteban did in the 1520s and 1530s. And they went and lived with Native American peoples and eventually were caught in northern New Spain. And as you can imagine, when Spanish soldiers found Grolet and l'Archevêque, they took them to Mexico City to interrogate them and ask what the heck a couple of Frenchmen were doing wandering around northern New Spain. They're interrogated and then sent to Spain, where they are further interrogated, and it's decided that these two guys have seen enough of Nueva España that they can't be allowed to return back to France because they'll be able to tell their French government and military a lot about the Spanish territories in Mexico and North America. So what happens to them? They're sent to Mexico City and they are sentenced to live their life out in Nuevo Mexico in New Mexico. So when New Mexico is reconquered and recolonized in the 1690s, l'Archevêque and Grolet come north, and with Vargas, they settle in New Mexico. And it's quite interesting how quick they become Hispanic. Their names become Juan Archevêque and Santiago Gurulet. They marry into local Hispano families, and they're said to have tattoos all over their faces because of the time they spent with Native Americans. But this is just kind of fascinating because we tend to think of just Spanish people and Native American people in New Mexico, and it's more complex than that. And New Mexico's French history reaches back to Fray Marcos de Niza, who explored here in 1539 with Esteban the Moor, the African. He was supposedly from France. So New Mexico also has a deep French history, and it's really solidified with Crolé, Gurule, and Archiveke, who are our common ancestors as well. So that's it for now. Thank you for joining me. I'll see you next time. Hasta pronto. Bye.